So yeah, I'm Chuck Jacoby. I am the supervising environmental scientist for the estuaries section in the Bureau of Water Resources at the St. John's District. And what I'm put together for you today is a little history of what we call the northern coastal basins and the water quality in that part of the world. So I think one event that kind of kicked off a lot of activity was in 1995 when fecal coliforms were detected in the system, and that started to put restrictions on oyster harvesting. And so there also were some other general concerns about water quality, but after that 1995 event, a task force was stood up to look at oyster and water quality. It's still carrying on, and that involved the folks who collected shellfish, citizens, staff from agencies, and so forth. Also following this, the St. John's District began what was known as the Northern Coastal Basins Program. And initially, that program had a relatively small footprint. It ran from Ponce Inlet up to Ponte Vedra. There was a swim plan developed, and a swim plan is a surface water improvement management plan. So recognizing the issues with water quality, there was a plan developed to try to address those. Things like how do we address stormwater runoff and how do we address septic and so forth. The surface water improvement and management plan process actually initially had funding, legislative funding. That sort of faded away after a while, but the district, carries on their work. The plan itself is a kind of a useful framework to bring pieces together and to hang management efforts off of. So as part of a set of initiatives that the district began, there was a new NCB effort that started in 2015. And that expanded the footprint. So now the northern coastal basins for the district runs from Ponce Inlet up to the Georgia border. So kind of expanded our view of the world. And are working on an update of the swim plan as a part of that. So one of the things that, drives swim plans and other management efforts are, well, there's two things I'll talk about. One is the status of the water, and the other one are trends in the water quality. So this slide conveys something about the status, and what you see in the map are a series of colored polygons, and each of those colored polygons indicates that there's an impairment in water quality in that region. So there are multiple what are called water bodies that are impaired, and you may have heard the term floating around of a WBID, WBID, and that's a water body identification, and it's a number, and that's the way the DEP tracks these things. So impairments are declared because of inability to make use of the water in the way that people desire. So it's declared impaired relative to a designated use. There actually are 5 classes of use, as it were, but the simple way to maybe think about it is it fishable, swimmable, or drinkable? So that's how impairment is declared, is to look at characteristics of the water quality to see if the use is possible. So we see on the map there 4 categories of impairments are shown. Bacterial impairments, so you get fecal coliforms and things in the water column. And that's where that oyster issue came from, the fecal bacteria. Dissolved oxygen is an issue in a lot of water bodies where the dissolved oxygen levels fall below 2 milligrams per liter, which stresses the aquatic animals. Metals can be an issue, lead and some others. Nutrients is a fairly widespread issue, and that can interact quite strongly with things like the dissolved oxygen levels. So bacteria will use dissolved oxygen. That's one way you get low dissolved oxygen, but you can also have things like phytoplankton that use the nutrients, the nitrogen and phosphorus primarily. And when you get large amounts of those, they can drive oxygen levels up and down. The impairments do have subcategories, but again, that's, if you want to delve into that, that's the kind of information is available. And it's possible for a water body to be impaired from more than one thing. So if you get declared impaired, then you move into the total maximum daily load process. And it is a process, it's an ongoing kind of regulatory process. Initially, the waters that are declared impaired will get what's called a total maximum daily load. So there's calculations done to estimate a safe load and calculations done to estimate a margin of safety. So this is for things that drive those impairments that are coming into the water body from the land, typically driven by people's activities. So fertilizers on your lawn, septic leachate, stormwater runoff, those kinds of things will drive the impairments. And the TMDL is just an estimate of the load that's comprised of the safe load, the one that won't impair the water body, won't cause the use to be degraded, and this margin of safety. And then calculate what the current load is, and if the current load is larger than that sort of safe load, that triggers reductions. So a regulatory process by which the various stakeholders, cities, counties, large industries, or so forth, get allocated reductions. So the goal is to lower the inputs down to that TMDL. Those allocations and people's plans for meeting those reductions are wrapped up in a Basin Management Action Plan, or a BMAP is the acronym. And those usually run on 3 by 5 year cycles. So the plan kind of looks out 15 years in 3 chunks. And all of this process has got a learning loop in it. So people recognize quite clearly that estimates of safe loads and current loads are surrounded by uncertainty. We don't have all the information we need to do that perfectly. The margin of safety helps, building in a little margin of safety, but also this idea of assessing progress on these 5 year cycles. So at the end of each cycle, each year they go over where they are, but at the end of the 5 year cycle, there's a fairly major review of how things are going. And this adaptive approach to management means that if it's not going the way you'd hoped, then you can adjust. So certainly by the end of the 15 years, you'll know whether you need to do more. If you get the TMDL, if it hits the TMDL, and often there's a set of indicators that are wrapped into the Basin Management Action Plan. If those indicators show that you have achieved the goal of removing the impairment, then the reductions can stop. So you may get there early, or you may have to do more work, and it depends on what's measured out in the real world. And so that takes us to monitoring, which is a big part of the way the district helps to support this process. The process itself belongs, as it were, to the Department of Environmental Protection. So they're the ones that manage that process. Typically, the districts help by providing information that assists with the assessment and with the adaptation of the process. So in terms of the northern coastal basins, we've been monitoring 26 sites. target monthly sampling. Sometimes you don't get there, but that's the goal. Focus mostly on the estuarine waters, so the downstream ends of the tributaries, and the intracoastal and the coastal rivers. And all the data that we collect ends up going into the state's database as part of the information that's used to drive that TMDL process. I should mention that if you want to avoid the TMDL process, you can, and groups have done a sort of a voluntary effort. So there are what are called reasonable assurance plans. Mosquito Lagoon is developing, the stakeholders there have developed a reasonable assurance plan. They knew they were going to be declared impaired, and they thought that they would prefer to develop this plan themselves and move forward. So that's recognized. Tampa Bay did that as well. So you don't necessarily have to go into the TMDL process. So what kinds of things do we measure? There are a lot of field measurements are taken with probes out and so forth and other gear. Temperature is obviously an important characteristic of the water bodies. Conductivity combined with temperature will give you salinity for estuarine waters. That's important, drives a lot of the flora and fauna of the plants and animals. pH is important and maybe becoming more important. There's evidence that the oceans for sure are acidifying, and the coastal waters may be. Dissolved oxygen we talked a little bit about, and that's critical for all the aquatic animals. We also record depth, the depth that the water's collected, and that's the water that goes into the lab measurements, which are coming up. And then something called Secchi depth, which if you haven't experienced a Secchi disc, is a black and white disc usually that you lower into the water column with a line that's marked with distances, and then you measure where the disc goes out of sight. And that's a long-term is where method for looking at water clarity. So the Secchi is the name of the priest that invented the disc back several hundred years ago. So Secchi measurements have been going on for a long time. We also collect water, lots and lots of bottles of water that go into the laboratory to be analyzed for things like suspended solids. So that's particles in the water that may block light and keep some of the submerged vegetation from getting enough light. Turbidity, which is another way to look at water clarity. Color, which is the tannins and so forth that come in from the tributaries usually and from the marshes. Metals, we do a suite of metals in the laboratory. But some of the ones that we'll focus in on as I go forward here are laboratory measurements about total and dissolved carbon, also silica, which is important for some of the plants. But the main ones are nitrogen, phosphorus, and chlorophyll. So nitrogen and phosphorus are these macronutrients, as we call them. They're the ones that are used in large quantities by all of the plants. And chlorophyll is a way to look at phytoplankton. It's a measure of their biomass. So all phytoplankton have chlorophyll as a pigment. That's a photosynthetic pigment. So it's what takes in the light, converts it to energy. It's the pigment that helps do that. And it's a way for us to look at biomass without having to look as closely for the single cell organisms themselves. So I said one of the things we looked at was status, and the other one we look at mostly is trends. And so when we look at trends, these are trend estimates done by the district. There's a 15-year window, so it's a moving window. So every year you move it 1 year down the line. And that's important to remember. So in the Indian River Lagoon, which is another water body that we deal with, 1998 led to a huge amount of rain. That was an El Nino year, a major El Nino, massive amount of rainfall. and the concentrations of things like total nitrogen just went through the roof. So when we were doing this trends analysis, as long as 1998 was in the window, it looked like everything was decreasing until 1998 moved out of the window, and then you could see that things actually were increasing. So it's a statistical thing. It's something that you have to kind of understand and pay attention to as you interpret the results. So looking at the map, there are a set of symbols. So the triangle pointing down is a decreasing trend, so concentrations are falling. Triangle pointing up is an increasing trend. The gray dot says, well, we don't have 15 years of data, so it doesn't fit into our ability to calculate a trend. And the blue box is stable. So conditions may not be good. In other words, the water may not be where you want it to be, but it's not getting worse. It's also not getting better. It's pretty much staying the same. So there's a few places here where you see increases. That's the red boxes to try to highlight those. So in Moses Creek and Flagler Beach, nitrogen concentrations have been increasing. There's a couple of others that are decreasing up north, up in the St. Mary's and the Nassau rivers. And then you can see that there are about 10 sites that don't have enough data. And those are sites that we've added relatively recently. Total phosphorus, good news is there weren't increases. There were decreases in 3 places. So the Matanzas River, Rose Bay, and Spruce Creek. And Rose Bay had a major restoration effort. So there was a lot of work done to improve circulation that had been cut off by causeways. And Spruce Creek has a TMDL that they've been operating under. So there is some, good news about phosphorus. Chlorophyll, kind of a mixed bag again, last 15 years. So again, there's a fair number of sites that are stable. 3 sites where chlorophyll concentrations have been increasing, Moultrie Creek, Pillish Creek, Tomoka River at LPGA Boulevard. And a couple of places where they're decreasing, Bulow Creek, and again, Rose Bay, which may relate back to that restoration. But overall, the water quality in a fair bit of the northern coastal basins definitely needs work. So there are TMDLs that are lined up. They just haven't progressed the basin management action plans at this point. And that's probably mostly to do with the number of these things that you can operate at one time. And so partly because the trends are not showing increases, these get held until other places have been dealt with. But you can expect there to be conversations about basin management action plans coming. And now let's pitch it over to Jennifer.
All right, I'm queuing mine up. So that was a fabulous overview of the water quality. And I hope if any of you are interested in the status and trends report, that you do access that on our website. It is a really useful way to see what's going on, where data is collected, and what those trends are over time. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the fun stuff maybe, or some of the projects and places that we're working to improve that water quality, and some of the district lands, some of the conservation efforts on those properties. And then finally, I will wrap it up with things that you as individuals, or we as individuals, can do in thinking about our water resources in Florida, around the GTM, those sort of things. So I zoomed in from the northern coastal basin perspective, and I'm really focused right around the area around the GTM. And I did want to point out that there are a lot of protected areas around the GTM. Everyone probably already knows that, but as Abby had mentioned, 2 of our district properties, the Moses Creek Conservation Area and the Pellicer Creek Conservation Area, are district-owned properties. Hopefully everyone that is participating today has either been out to those, if you do enjoy recreating and hiking, fishing, potentially just getting out in your bird watching attire with your binoculars. There are a lot of great opportunities on those. Our website is the best place to go for that information about hiking trails and all of that, and to make sure that they're open and there's no management being done. But we'll start with some of our land management projects in Pellicer Creek Conservation Area. And Pellicer Creek is in Flagler County. It's a little over 3,000 acres. And there has been a lot of restoration work. Oh, I have a circle that pops up. A lot of restoration work that has been focused on Sandhill Restoration. And there's approximately 180 acres that is being restored. And the hard part, if you will, of the restoration has taken place, and now we just need time to allow those longleaf pines to grow. So that period of time is gonna help us to further restore that longleaf pine system. And then the other exciting project that is going on here, sorry, I'm having trouble with my screen, is a project that we're working on that was a cost share grant to restore an additional 7 acres through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So that is an ongoing project to continue restoring Sandhill ecosystems. And then moving on to our Moses Creek Conservation Area, there's a lot of work in Moses Creek to address these off-site, so sandhill pines that have gotten established or that were planted on Moses Creek prior to the district acquiring it. And sand pines are able to thrive and live in these habitats. However, they will greatly alter the habitat and the ecosystem on those properties. And so the district land managers have been working really hard to remove those sand pines through either cutting them, mechanical harvesting, using roller choppers, and then when possible, getting fire in to Moses Creek as well. We attack it with all of the different land management tools that are possible. And the reason that sand pines are so bad is you can notice in this top picture here, that is a cluster of sand pines. And so if you have ever been out hiking on our properties, we want them to have a greater open understory. And so when you get these tight sand pines that shouldn't be there, they have a different biology where they will have a very even age system. So they'll all be about the same age, and they have really strong fire. So when fire does move through those, it will kill off all of the sand pines, but you'll get some of those cones that will open up and create this new really dense even age system. So it's a really expensive problem to be addressing in terms of land management, because there is this long-term problem once they have gotten established. But Moses Creek is a beautiful site that we will continue working on restoring those longleaf ecosystems and removing those off-site sand pines. A lot of the district's work in terms of helping to address some of the water quality issues and decrease the amount of nutrients that are moving into our water bodies are accomplished through our cost share projects. And so I'm going to go through a few projects that have been funded through our cost share projects. And these are really focused right around the GTM, those watersheds that would go into the GTM. And so one of the ways that we are working to decrease nutrients making their way directly into our surface water is through utilizing reclaimed water for irrigation. And so this helps the district and our end water users on two fronts. It allows for reclaimed water to be utilized for irrigation rather than using our drinking water. So that's a benefit. It's creating this alternative supply of water for our needs, but it's also diverting that water away from surface water discharges that they may have been utilized prior, and being able to use them in areas such as this top picture is St. Johns County, their golf course, where it is irrigated with reclaimed water. And so you're allowing those nutrients that are in that reclaimed water to be taken up by the grass as it's growing. So if you have reclaimed water in your neighborhood and you use it for your irrigation, it is important to know that you can decrease how much you're fertilizing so that you're managing your landscape responsibly. So a few of those projects where we have increased the amount of alternative water supply by 5.86 million gallons a day of this reclaimed water through either storage or transmission, and even the creation of some of the reclaimed water facilities have been in Nocatee, with JEA, with St. Johns County Utilities, and with Palm Coast Utilities as well. And so these are some of the projects that have been able to help take that water, that treated wastewater, out of our surface water, so without the surface water discharges, and use them for irrigation. Some of our cost share projects have been focused on helping with flood protection. So a couple of those are some tidal backflow preventers. So that's what is in this picture on the top. And these help with those high tide and storm surge influence that may come from the coast up into our stormwater systems. And this is an example that is has been utilized in the city of St. Augustine to help with those high tide levels in those stormwater infrastructure. Because historically, our stormwater systems were just open and they were able to move out to the lowest point. But as water levels are rising, this is a way that communities are looking to address that water backflowing in through the stormwater systems. We've also helped Palm Coast with some of their flood control structures. And then we've also been working with flood protection and water quality through improving stormwater systems. So whether they are community-wide, so in a neighborhood, or if they are on a larger scale, so more citywide, these are going to help with flood protection, because that is the reason that we design our stormwater systems, or that stormwater systems are designed, is to hold that water that is being displaced by our development. So through our changing of the way that water is moving by increasing more runoff, that's gonna help when we have stormwater systems that are maybe able to hold on to water for a little bit longer, or are getting expanded so that they can help remove nutrients as well. So a couple of those examples are down in Flagler Beach, and then a few over in the city of St. Augustine. And so anytime, again, that we can improve those stormwater systems, they will also improve the water quality of the water that's coming out of them, hopefully. And then finally, one of the other ways that the district is working to improve our water resources is through our next generation. So about 5 years ago, the district started its Blue School Grant Program. And this has been one of the things that I get to oversee. And it provides public and charter middle and high school teachers the opportunity to apply for grants that are to do a water-related project. This is an example of a school that actually came out to the GTM and did their education program, but the district was able to help provide them with the funding for doing a field trip. So this was not this school year, it was a previous year, but it has allowed a lot of schools to get great opportunities to do field trips that they may not otherwise be able to accomplish during the school year with tightened budgets of our school systems. This year, there's a school down in Flagler County that is actually going to create some additional or some virtual estuary tours and discuss estuaries. So they'll definitely get the resources and directed towards the resources that the GTM education staff have developed so that we can make sure they're creating really great stuff. But did just want to mention that. So if any of you know teachers that might be interested in applying, please send their information my way or my information their way. And then finally, so those are the ways that the district is working, looking at water quality, working with communities, utilities to improve water quality. How are you as an individual influencing water quality? And Chuck had mentioned a couple of those, thinking about our septic tanks, stormwater runoff, fertilizers in our lawns. One of the best things to do is to understand that we do have an influence on our water quality that's all around us. Here in Florida, our waters are so tightly connected. What we're doing in our landscapes, how we're irrigating, can really have a big impact on those nearby water bodies. And we're all very close to our water bodies, making sure that we pick up our pet waste so that we're not having a negative impact in terms of bacteria or nutrients is a good way that those pet owners can make sure, even within our own yards, that we are helping with that. And then also maintaining septic systems and making sure that they're functioning as designed. So those are a few of our ways that you influence water quality. I hope that everybody has enjoyed the presentation, and I think we're happy to take any questions if you have them.
Great, thank you both for your wonderful presentations. I will go ahead and open up. The chat box is still open for any questions any attendees might have. You are also welcome to navigate to the participants tab and raise your hand, or if you would like to turn your video on, you can also raise your physical hand as well. I don't see any questions yet, though. All right, Jeff Finnans asks, where do the metals come from and why are they in some of the particular areas that they've been found?
So they're typically going to come from upstream, as it were. And so the areas that probably get, well, they could come from local efforts, right on sort of the estuarine waters, but a lot of them will come from upstream and manufacturing or other kinds of things that, generate metals. So again, it's typically human activities, and it's probably, centered around places that drain landscapes.
Sally has a comment. She says, thank you. Good to know the contributions of the water management district in improving water quality. In addition to what Jennifer said about pointing them in the direction of GTM's virtual programming, we also, Jennifer has participated, the Coastal Training Program has hosted some virtual sharing sessions with some other educators and trainers in the area. And so it's been a really great way to work with our partners in the area to make sure that we're sharing resources with everyone and making sure that the public and the school-age kids in the area are getting the resources that they need to learn about water quality and the efforts that they can make. Sally has a question about what about drainage from landfills in terms of water quality, thinking about pet waste and things like that.
I think, again, drainage from any place that material is stored is a concern, and that's you know, partly potentially treated with treating runoff and stormwater, but also I think, you know, locally at those facilities as well.
And a lot of the newer landfills are going to have a lining, and so there's not as much of the historically bad contaminants that might be in landfills. So they are regulated.
All right. Mary has a question. What corrective actions can you take when water quality continues to decline? And do you have enforcement authority?
So yeah, it's the DEP does, the Department of Environmental Protection. The TMDL process, you know, does have some teeth in it. It's relatively early days for most of the TMDLs, and so, you know, we're still working on the fact that people are attempting to be compliant. But if things don't work out that way, there are some steps that can be taken to push things forward.
Awesome. Jeff has a question. How does maintaining conservation areas fit in with the Water Management District's overall goal and charter?
So the district has its 4 main goal missions, the 4 core missions of water supply, flood protection, natural systems, and water quality. And so when it does purchase a property, it is always with the first desire of protecting water resources. So with Moses Creek and Pellicer Creek, we're protecting the area around those creeks, protecting that water resource, and a part of being a good stewards of the land that we own is making sure and working to improve the habitat of that entire property, because it being a properly functioning ecosystem will help us with that water quality and flood protection services that our district lands may be able to otherwise provide.
Thank you. Irene has a comment. She says, thank you. I was pleased to hear about the Blue School grant program and hope we can utilize the virtual programs that have been developed by GTM's education staff.
That will definitely get passed along to those teachers.
All right, does anyone have any additional questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or type it into the chat box.
So I will also say, for those of you who are attending, I'm going to do a little shameless promotion of our own webinars that the district has been hosting. We have one coming up in 2 weeks for more about the cost share program across the entire district. And you can find out that information on our education website, and that's at SJRWMD.com. So I encourage you to sign up for those.
Thanks, Jennifer. Jeff Vinnan asked, are there any joint programs with GTM other than education?
I'm not aware of any.
I'm not exactly sure what program means, but certainly we work with GTM to do a variety of sampling events and things. So monitoring oysters and other things like that, where our interests, water quality, exchange, you know, water quality information. So certainly GTM is a partner in a lot of what we do.
Definitely. And I know you mentioned also the Oyster and Water Quality Task Force. We have a lot of district staff that come to those meetings.
Yes.
The management advisory group meetings that are held quarterly. We have a district rep on that. But yeah, we enjoy partnering with the district on a lot of our programs. And Jennifer was a co-organizer for the Tri-County Water School, which was held at the beginning of this year. Actually, it was held in January, and that was a good program for our elected officials in the area. So that was a great program. So if there are not any additional questions, I'll go ahead and start a quick poll. It should be launching on your screens now. I just want to add that this recording will be trimmed up and will be posted on our YouTube page and will be sent out this week. Today does wrap up the second series of our GTM Talks webinars. The third series is in the works. We are still planning, but as soon as we get further details on that, we will send that out as well, and it will be on the GTM website. And lastly, I just want to thank Jennifer and Charles for presenting today. We will stick around for a few more minutes if anyone has any last minute questions. So make sure you fill out the poll for us, and we'll stick around here for a few more minutes. Thank you, everyone.